My name is Catherine Halloran. I'm 36 years old. And on a Tuesday afternoon in February, I was sitting at my desk in a glass-walled office on the 18th floor of a building in downtown Boston, reviewing a commercial title abstract for a client. When my phone buzzed with a call from my father, I let it go to voicemail. He called again 2 minutes later. I let that one go too. He called a third time. I picked up. I said, "Dad, I'm at work. What is it?" He laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "Kathy, I sold the house." I said, "What house?" He said, "Mom's house. Your grandmother's house. I sold it last week. The closing was Friday. Your brother needed the money. He had some debt. You don't even have kids." "Kathy, he has 3. The money went where it needed to go. Don't make this weird. I work in real estate law. I have been a licensed attorney in Massachusetts for 9 years. I work at a mid-size firm that represents commercial developers. Mid-job? Every working day is to read paper. I read deeds. I read titles. I read closing statements. I read fraud reports. I had been the one who drafted the documents that transferred my grandmother, Margaret Halloran's house to me when she died 8 months earlier. I had drafted them with my own hands. I had filed them with the Suffolk County Registry of Deeds in June. I had recorded the deed. I had paid the transfer tax out of my own checking account. I had, on the day after my grandmother's funeral, sat at her kitchen table with my mother and my father and read aloud, line by line, the will my grandmother had signed in front of 3 witnesses, including her own attorney, Howard Doyle, in which she left the house at 14 Sycamore Lane in Quincy, Massachusetts to me, Catherine Margaret Halloran, in fee, simple, absolute, free and clear. I had then explained to my parents what fee simple, absolute meant. I had explained it twice. My father had nodded. My mother had folded her arms. So when my father, 8 months later, called me on a Tuesday afternoon to tell me he had sold a house that did not belong to him, that had never belonged to him, that was titled solely in my name with a recorded deed at the registry, I did not raise my voice. I did not curse. I did not cry. I said, into the phone, very calmly, "Dad, the house was never yours to sell." He laughed again. He said, "Kathy, don't be dramatic. The deed was in Mom's name. We were the next of kin. It's family property. You'll get over it." I said, "Dad, I'm going to hang up now. I'm going to call you back in 10 minutes. I hung up. I did not call him back in 10 minutes. I called my friend and former classmate Olivia Reyes, who is a criminal defense attorney with the Suffolk County DA's office, and I asked her one question. I said, "Lou, if somebody forges a deed and sells a house that is recorded in someone else's name, what charge is that?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Kath, why are you asking me that? Whose house?" I said, "Mine." She said, "Kath, don't move. Don't call your father back. Don't post anything online. Don't tell your brother. Send me everything you have. The will, the deed, the recording receipt, the transfer tax receipt, anything you can pull up in the next 20 minutes. I'll be at your office at 4. She was at my office at 4. She read my grandmother's will once. She read the recorded deed once. She read the seller's side closing documents I had pulled from a public record search by 415. She looked up. Her eyes had widened in the small, precise way that lawyers' eyes widen when they have just identified the elements of a crime," she said. "Kath, he committed fraud. This is a felony. Multiple felonies. Actually, we're looking at forgery, larceny by false pretense, recording a false document, possible wire fraud if any of the proceeds crossed state lines. The house is yours. The buyer is going to have a very bad day. Your father is going to have a worse one." 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning at 7:14 a.m., a Quincy police detective and 2 officers arrested my father on the front porch of his own house in Braintree, Massachusetts. He was wearing a brown bathrobe and slippers. He was holding a coffee mug that said "World's Best Dad" on it. My mother was screaming behind him in the doorway. My brother Brendan, my older brother, the one with the new Tesla, was inside the house. He had been sleeping there for 4 nights because his marriage had fallen apart the previous Friday, which was related to the Tesla, which was related to other things, which I will get to. My father was placed in handcuffs. The detective, whose name was Sergeant Marisol Quintana, to read him his rights with the quiet professionalism of a woman who had read those rights about 4,000 times. My father did not stop talking the entire time. He kept saying, "To no one in particular. There has been a mistake. There has been a mistake. My daughter doesn't understand. My daughter would never. Before I tell you what was on the deed my father had filed, what my brother Brendan said when he finally called me from a number I had not blocked, and why my mother is currently living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Weymouth alone. Tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from this evening? I'm honestly curious how far a story like this is going to travel by morning. The thing about being told that a house you legally own is no longer yours is that the call is not the wound. The call is a confession. My father had spent the entire phone call assuming I would react the way I had reacted my entire life, which was by absorbing it, by being practical, by being the daughter who could be told things and would not make them difficult. He had built that assumption over 36 years. My grandmother Margaret had built the deed in 8 months. The deed won. I'm 2 years younger than Brendan. He was born first. He was the boy. In our family that mattered? Not in some old world way. Exactly. In a more banal way, my father was a sheet metal foreman who had, by the time I was old enough to notice, decided that having a son who could one day be told he was his father's pride was a complete substitute for paying attention to a daughter. I had been paying attention to my father since I was about 4. He had not been paying attention back. My mother's name is Donna. She is 65. She had worked, off and on, as a school cafeteria worker until Brendan was born. And then she had become the kind of woman who organized her entire life around her son's accomplishments, which were, by the time I was 13, already a thin file. Brendan had been the high school football star. Brendan had been the one who almost went to a state college on a scholarship until he didn't. Brendan had been the one who got into a small private college and dropped out after 3 semesters. Brendan had been the one who went to work for my Uncle Donnie's HVAC business and quit after 8 months because, as my mother told everyone at Christmas that year, Brendan is meant for bigger things. Brendan, by the time I was finishing law school, had not held any of the bigger things he was meant for. He had married my sister-in-law Tessa in 2014. They had 3 children. The children are now 12, 10, and 7. They are wonderful children. I love them. They are not in this story by name, beyond this paragraph, because they did nothing wrong. Brendan, between 2014 and 2024. Had worked roughly 7 different jobs. Started 2 different side hustles. My mother had financed without telling my father. And accumulated, by my own forensic estimate, which I will explain in a moment, approximately $211. 0 inches personal debt across credit cards. A personal loan from my Uncle Donnie that had never been repaid. A defaulted business loan from a small bank in Quincy. And a $46,000 IRS lien I learned about purely by accident in 2022. My grandmother Margaret had seen all of this. She had seen it for 40 years. Margaret was my father's mother. She had been a labor and delivery nurse at Boston City Hospital for 38 years. She had bought the house at 14 Sycamore Lane in 1972 with her own savings and a small VA-backed loan she had inherited from her late husband. She had paid that loan off in 1989. She had owned the house, free and clear, for the next 33 years. She had raised my father in that house. She had hosted every Christmas in that house. She had sat with me at the kitchen table in that house. When I was 19 and home from college on a winter break, and asked me, very gently, what I wanted to do with my life, I had told her I wanted to be a lawyer. I had told her I wanted to do real estate work because I liked the way buildings stayed put. She had laughed. She had said, "Catherine, buildings stay put because someone wrote them down on a piece of paper. You're going to be very good at this." She had been right. By the time my grandmother got sick, in early 2023, she was 86 years old and as sharp as she had ever been. She had pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis was stage 3. The prognosis was, at best, a year. She called me on a Saturday morning in March. She said, "Catherine, come over. I want to talk to you about my will." I drove out to Quincy that afternoon. We sat at the kitchen table. She had already been to her attorney, Howard Doyle. Twice. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her. She had written, in her old labor and delivery nurse handwriting, 3 lines. The first said house to Catherine, outright. No co-tenancy. No life estate. No conditions. The second said liquid assets to Robert and Donna. That was my parents. The third said personal effects to be distributed by Catherine at her discretion. She turned the legal pad to face me. She said, "Catherine, I want you to read this and tell me if I am being unfair." I read it. I read it twice. I said, "Grandma, why am I getting the house?" She said, "Catherine, your father is 66 years old. He has not stayed in any decision for more than 5 years in his entire adult life. Your mother makes every decision he then unmakes. Your brother is a lovely man, with a problem of his own creation that I am not going to solve from beyond the grave. The house belonged to my husband and to me. I built it into something. I am not going to watch it be sold within 18 months of my death to pay your brother's debts. I want it to belong to someone who will know what it is. That person is you." I had said, "Grandma, they're going to be very angry." She had said, "Catherine, they are not entitled to my house. They are entitled to my love, which I have given them for as long as they have been alive. The house is something else. The house is mine." She had paused. She had said, "Catherine, there is one more thing. I want you to understand that my saying this to you is not a request. It is information. I have already been to Howard. The will is signed. It is filed. It is going to do what it is going to do, whether you like it or not. I am only telling you about it now, so that you can be ready when your father starts to behave the way I know he is going to behave. Are you ready? Catherine, I had said. Grandma, I think so. She had said, Catherine, be ready. Don't let your father rewrite this when I am not here to stop him. He will try. Your mother will help him. Your brother will benefit. Be ready. I had said. I will be. She had reached across the kitchen table. She had taken my hand. She had said, Catherine, I have one regret in my life. The regret is that I did not make my husband stand up to your father when your father was 22 and started borrowing money. He did not pay back. I let my husband let it slide. I have been watching the consequences of letting it slide for 40 years. I am not going to make the same mistake from the other side of the dirt. I love you. Go home. Be a good lawyer. Be ready. I had gone home. I had not told my parents. My grandmother had asked me not to. She had said, Catherine, I am going to tell them after the surgery. If there is going to be one. Or if I take a turn for the worse. Whichever comes first. I want you to have a clean run at being my granddaughter for as long as I can give you one. She had taken a turn for the worse in late September. She had gone into hospice in October. She had died on November 14th. 2023. She was 86. She had been peaceful at the end. I had been with her. The funeral had been the following Saturday. Howard Doyle had read the will the next afternoon. In my grandmother's living room. With my parents and my brother present. My parents had not known about my house. My brother had not known about my house. The reading of the will had taken 46 minutes. The 45 minutes about the liquid assets and personal effects had been calm. The minute about the house had not been. My father had stood up. My mother had stood up. My brother had stayed sitting because my brother had been on his phone. My father had said, Howard, there must be a mistake. Howard had said, Robert, there is no mistake. Your mother was very specific. We had 3 meetings. The will reflects exactly her wishes. My mother had said, Howard, this is a family home. It belongs to all of us. Howard had said, Donna, with respect, the house belonged to Margaret. She has decided who it belongs to now. The decision is final. My father had turned to me. He had said, Kathy, you have to fix this. You have to. We can sell the house and split it 3 ways. You don't need it. Brendan needs it. I had said, Dad, I am not selling Grandma's house. I had said it as gently as I could. My father had stared at me. His face had done something I had not seen before. It was not anger. It was a kind of slow, simmering reevaluation, as if he were realizing for the first time that I was not who he had been assuming I was. My mother had said, Catherine, sweetheart, this is going to cause a real problem. Brendan is in a difficult position right now. The kids. Catherine, I had said, Mom, I am not selling the house. I am not putting Brendan on the deed. I am going to honor Grandma's will. I am very sorry. I am not changing my mind. My father had said, Kathy, we will see about that. He had said it quietly. I had taken note. I want you to understand something. I had assumed, in November, that my father's we will see about that had been a parental fantasy. I had assumed he would mope for a few months. My mother would side with him. My brother would pretend to be too proud to take any of the inheritance, even though he very much wanted some of it. And the family would either come around or quietly cut me off. I had assumed I would deal with whatever came next when it came. I had not assumed my father who had not opened a tax return in 15 years because my mother handled them, would attempt to commit a real estate fraud. I had been wrong. I will tell you, in the order that I learned it, what my father did. In December, 2 weeks after my grandmother's funeral, my father went to a small storefront notary public in a strip mall in Weymouth, Massachusetts. He brought with him a quitclaim deed he had downloaded from a free legal forms website. The deed had been filled out by hand. It transferred the property at 14 Sycamore Lane from Margaret Halloran, deceased, to Robert Halloran. Individually, it was signed, on the grantor line, Margaret R. Halloran. The signature was not my grandmother's. The handwriting on the signature, according to the forensic handwriting analyst the DA's office hired 3 months later, was, with 78% confidence, my mother's. My father had walked into the notary's office, had presented the deed, had presented his own driver's license, had presented a photocopy of my grandmother's expired Massachusetts driver's license that he had taken from her wallet at the funeral home, and had told the notary, a young woman named Jenna, who had been licensed for less than a year, that his mother had signed the deed at the family home before her death, and had asked him to bring it in to be notarized later. When we have time, Jenna had not done what she should have done. Jenna should have refused to notarize a document where the signer was not present. Jenna had been new. She had not refused. She had stamped the deed. She had signed her own line. She had collected $15. My father had walked out with a notarized quitclaim deed, transferring my grandmother's house to himself. Signed by a dead woman. Witnessed by no one. Notarized by a young notary who would later cry on the witness stand. My father had then taken the deed to the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds. My grandmother's house was in Quincy, which is in Norfolk County. The clerk at the registry had recorded the deed because that is what county registries do. They do not investigate the validity of signatures. They record what is presented. The recording fee was $155. My father had paid it. The deed had been recorded on December 11th. 2023. He had not, at this point, told anyone. He had not told my mother, my brother, or me. The deed had sat in the public record for 10 weeks while my father waited to see whether anyone, particularly me, was paying attention. I had not been paying attention. I had been grieving my grandmother. I had been doing my actual job. I had not run a public records check on a house I knew was titled in my own name. Why would I have? I had recorded my own deed in June. After the will cleared probate, the will had cleared probate quickly because my grandmother's affairs had been clean. The deed in my name had been recorded on June 14th. 2024. I had recorded it. I had paid the transfer tax. I had filed the necessary forms. I had then, 3 months later, made one mistake. I had not changed the homeowner's insurance into my own name immediately. I had let my grandmother's policy roll over because I had been planning to think about whether to keep the house, sell it, or rent it out. And I had wanted to give myself a year before I made any decisions. The insurance was still in my grandmother's name. The bills were going to her old mailing address, which was the house itself. My father had been collecting the mail at the house. He had been doing it under the polite pretense of watching the place while his daughter, who lived 25 minutes away, decided what I wanted to do with it. I had let him. I had made him a key. I had not changed the locks. I had told him to keep the heat on and to shovel the walk in winter so the place did not deteriorate. My father had been getting the insurance bills, the property tax bills, and the utility bills addressed to my grandmother. He had also, I would learn later, I'd been getting some bills addressed to me. Since I had updated some accounts, he had, very carefully, separated the two. The mail addressed to me, he had been forwarding to my apartment. The mail addressed to my grandmother, he had been keeping. In late January 2024, my father had taken the recorded quitclaim deed in his name and had walked into the office of a residential real estate broker in Quincy. A man named Calvin Reese, who had known my father from a softball league in the 1990s, he had told Calvin that his mother had passed, that the house was in his name, and that he was looking to sell quickly. He had handed Calvin the recorded deed, which was, en face, valid. Calvin had pulled the title himself. Calvin had seen, in the chain of title, the recorded quitclaim from Margaret Halloran to Robert Halloran in December 2023. Calvin had not seen, because Calvin had not looked carefully enough, the recorded deed in my name from June 2024. The deed in my name was filed in Suffolk County, not Norfolk County, because I had filed it through a Boston-based filing service that had, due to a clerical error, recorded the document in the wrong county. The deed had been corrected and re-recorded in Norfolk County in late September 2024. By the time my father went to Calvin in late January 2024, only the December 2023 quitclaim was visible to a careless title check. The June 2024 corrected recording was on the way, but had not been formally indexed yet. Because the registry had a backlog, I had not realized this gap existed. My father had not realized it existed either. He had simply gotten lucky. The buyer had been a young couple from Dorchester. They were named Yvonne and Marcus Peterson. They had 2 children. They had just sold their condo. They had been looking for a starter house in Quincy for 9 months. They had walked through 14 Sycamore Lane in late January with Calvin and had loved it. They had offered $328. Ling ling ling. My father had countered at $345. Ling ling ling. They had settled at $336. Ling ling ling. The closing had been on Friday, February 9th. 2024. My father had cleared. After broker fees and closing costs, 312美元. CBay. He had wired $211, 000 of that, to my brother Brendan's checking account on Monday, February 12th. 2024. He had used the rest to pay off 2 of his own credit cards and to put a deposit on a small RV that he and my mother had been talking about for years. My brother had used the $211, 000, over the following 2 days to pay off his $46. 000 IRS, lien. The remaining $84. 000 on his defaulted business loan. The $36. 000 he owed on 3 different credit cards, and to make a down payment on a Tesla Model 3, which he had been wanting for 2 years. The Tesla had cost $48. Ling ling ling. He had financed the rest. He had taken a photograph of the Tesla in his driveway in Hingham on February 16th. 2024. He had posted the photograph on Instagram. The caption had been 3 words and a fire emoji. My mother had commented underneath the post. Her comment had read, "Our favorite son deserves the best." The comment had received 1,200 likes. My father had called me on Tuesday, February 20th, at 2:47 inches the afternoon, and had laughed about it. I had not seen the Instagram post when he called. I had seen it that evening. I had not commented. I had called Olivia. Olivia had come to my office at 4. Olivia had read the documents. Olivia had said, "Kath, he committed fraud. This is a felony." She had paused. She had said, "Kath, I want to ask you something. The house is in your name. Legally. You can rescind the sale through civil action. The buyers will lose the house. They will sue your father. Eventually, but in the short term, they will be displaced. Or you can let the buyers keep the house. Sue your father for the proceeds and pursue the criminal charges separately. The first path is faster. The second path is kinder to the family that bought the house." I had thought about it for 40 seconds. I had said, "Lou, the Petersons didn't do anything wrong. Don't displace them. We sue my father for the money. We let the criminal charges do what they do." Olivia had nodded. She had said, "That's the answer I was hoping you'd give. Now, I'm going to ask you a harder question. Kath, are you sure you want to file the criminal charges? Once we file, this is out of your hands. Your father is going to be arrested. Your mother is going to be questioned. Because we have a strong reason to believe her handwriting is on the forged deed. Your brother is going to be questioned because he received the proceeds. The DA is going to charge. Whoever the DA charges, you will not be able to call any of this back." I had said, "Lou, my grandmother told me to be ready. This is what being ready looks like." Olivia had nodded again. She had taken my hand across the conference table. She had said, "Kath, okay, let's go." I had filed the civil rescission action against the recorded December 2023 deed first. The next morning, in Norfolk Superior Court, I had done it under my own name, with a brief affidavit attaching the original will, the recorded deed in my name, the death certificate, and a forensic comparison of my grandmother's known signature against the signature on the December 2023 quitclaim. The court had granted a temporary order voiding the December 2023 deed within 72 hours. The Petersons had been notified by Calvin's office that there was an issue with the title. Their closing attorney had called me directly. I had explained the situation to him as plainly as I could. I had told him, on the phone, that I was not going to rescind the underlying sale. I had told him I was going to deed the house to the Petersons directly, for the same $336. 000 they had paid, with the funds being clawed back from my father through the criminal restitution process. I had told him the family that bought the house would not be displaced. The closing attorney had been quiet for a long moment. Then he had said, "Ms. Halloran, thank you. I have practiced for 31 years. I have not seen a victim of this kind of fraud do what you are doing. The Petersons are going to keep their house. I am going to tell them. Thank you." I had said, "Tell them my grandmother would have liked them." The criminal investigation had begun the same week. Sergeant Quintana from the Quincy Police Department had been assigned. The DA had assigned a young assistant DA named Dolores Chapman, who had been at Olivia's law school 2 years behind her. Quintana and Chapman had built the case in 15 days. They had interviewed Jenna, the notary, who had cried. They had interviewed Calvin, the broker, who had been horrified and who had volunteered to testify. They had interviewed the Petersons, who had been gracious. They had pulled the wire records on the $211, 000, transfer from my father's checking account to Brendan's. They had pulled my brother's bank statements. They had identified, within those statements, the $46, 000 IRS lien payoff, the $84, 000. Business loan payoff. The credit card payments. And the $48. Niche Tesla. They had built a forensic timeline. The arrest had happened on Tuesday, March 12th, 2024, at 7:14 a.m. on my parents' porch in Braintree. My father had been wearing his bathrobe. He had been holding the world's best dad mug. My mother had been screaming behind him. My brother had been inside the house. He had not come out. He had been arrested separately. 3 days later, on a charge of receiving stolen property, he had been released on personal recognizance pending trial. My mother had been charged 6 weeks later. After the handwriting analyst had finalized the 78% confidence determination on the December 2023 deed signature, she had been charged with forgery and conspiracy. She had been released on her own recognizance as well. My father had not made bail for 9 days. The bail had been set at $50. Ling ling ling. He had not had $50. Ling ling ling. My brother could not post it because my brother's accounts had been frozen. My mother could not post it because my mother's accounts had been frozen. My Uncle Donnie, the one Brendan had stiffed on the personal loan, had been called by my mother on day 3. He had said, on the phone, "Donna, Brendan still owes me $30,000 from 2019. I am not posting bail for the man who let his son not pay me for 5 years. You should have raised your son better. Goodbye." Uncle Donnie had hung up. He had called me an hour later. He had said, "Kathy, I just told your mother I would not post bail for your father. I want you to know that. I want you to also know that I have always loved you. You were the only one in that house who ever said please and thank you. Your grandmother and I were close. She would be proud of you. Don't second-guess any of this." I had cried in my car for 10 minutes after that call. My father had eventually been bailed out by a bondsman after a small loan against the equity in my parents' house. The house was now also at risk because the loan had been at high interest. The trial process had taken 9 months. My father had pleaded guilty in October 2024 to forgery, larceny over $250, and recording a false document. He had been sentenced to 2.5 years in state prison. With 18 months suspended on a 5-year probation, he had been required to pay full restitution of $312. Subay, plus interest, plus the Petersons' legal fees, plus my legal fees, plus à $25. 000, fine. He had paid roughly $61,000 by liquidating retirement accounts. The remaining balance, approximately $290, 000 with interest and fees, had attached as a lien on my parents' house in Braintree. My mother had pleaded guilty to forgery and conspiracy in November 2024. She had been sentenced to 2 years probation, 40美元, 0 in fines, and 200 hours of community service. She had been required to attend financial crimes counseling, which she had attended sullenly. My brother had pleaded guilty to receiving stolen property in December 2024. He had been sentenced to 1 year of probation, 211美元, 0 pouce restitution, and full forfeiture of the Tesla, which was sold at auction by the state for $33. Ling ling ling. The Tesla auction money had gone toward his restitution. Tessa, my sister-in-law, had filed for divorce in February 2025. She had not known where the money had come from. She had thought my brother had received an inheritance. She had been horrified. She had taken the children. She had moved in with her own mother in Weymouth. She and I have lunch every other Thursday. The children call me Aunt Kath. They are doing better than anyone expected. My mother had moved out of my parents' house in March 2025 because the lien against the property and the legal fees had made it impossible to stay. She lives in a one-bedroom apartment in Weymouth. She works part-time at a CVS. She has not contacted me since the sentencing. She sent one card in November of last year. The card said, on the front, "Thinking of you?" Inside, there was no message, just her signature. I did not respond. My father is now serving the unsuspended portion of his sentence at a minimum security state facility in central Massachusetts. He has 11 months left. He has written me 3 letters. The first asked me to write back. The second asked me to visit. The third was different. The third was 4 sentences long. It said, "Kathy." I read the will again. Howard sent me a copy. I read it 3 times. I am 67 years old and I am writing this from a cell. Mom was right. I have not responded to that letter either. I have not thrown it away. It is in a folder. The folder is on a shelf in my office. The folder is labeled 14 Sycamore. It contains the will, the original deed, the recorded deed, the forged deed, the closing statement, the indictments, the plea agreements, the sentencing orders, the Petersons' thank you card, and 3 letters. The Petersons still live in my grandmother's house. They have repainted the kitchen. They have planted tulips along the front walk. I drove past once last spring. The tulips were yellow. My grandmother's tulips had been yellow. I did not stop. I did not need to. The night I came home from the sentencing hearing in October, after Eli, my husband had made me a sandwich because I had not eaten all day. I sat on the floor of our small living room and cried for the first time since the funeral. Eli sat on the floor next to me. He did not ask if I was okay. He just sat there, his shoulder against mine, until I was done. When I was done, I stood up, finished the sandwich, and went to bed. People sometimes ask whether I regret it, whether watching my father be led off his porch in a bathrobe was a price too high for a house. The honest answer is that the house was never the point. The house was the test. My grandmother had told me, at her kitchen table, 8 months before she died, that my father had been failing the test of his own life for 40 years and that she was tired of letting him pass it on, borrowed answers. She had handed me the test and told me to grade it honestly. I graded it honestly. So if you have ever been told that something your grandmother left you, in writing, in front of 3 witnesses, with the seal of an attorney on it, was actually a family asset and not yours, and if you have ever wondered whether the people who sign your inheritance away in their own heads are entitled to sign it away in real life, I want to leave you with the thing my grandmother said the last time she squeezed my hand at her kitchen table. Buildings stay put because someone wrote them down. Some families take what is written down and pretend it says something else. The job of the person whose name is on the paper is to remember what the paper actually says, and to be ready, when the day comes, to read it out loud. So tell me honestly, if your own father called you laughing on a Tuesday afternoon to inform you he had sold the house your grandmother had legally left you in writing, would you have argued with him on the phone? Would you have negotiated? Would you have explained? Or would you have hung up, called your attorney, and let the felony he had spent 6 months committing finally arrive at his front porch in a bathrobe at 7:14 inches the morning? This story isn't about punishment, it's about accountability. When something is legally and rightfully yours, protecting it isn't selfish. It's responsible. Sometimes the hardest part isn't facing strangers, but standing firm when it's your own family, crossing the line. If there's one thing to take from this, it's this. Knowing your rights means nothing if you're not willing to defend them. And doing the right thing may feel heavy in the moment, but it's what allows you to move forward without regret.